Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Willem van Staren. Just before I start, like Ashley and most of the people before said, that this is really a joint venture, and most of the work we've done over the past few years wouldn't have been able to unless it was for people like Sandy. We've really done a lot of work with them. We've partnered with DIA, specifically with the BMP. The EWT just showed you what they've enabled us to do. And so a big thanks to them as well. And then personally, in the Old Transvaal province, we work from Mpumalanga. I've been rather fortunate that it's been really well documented over the last 30, almost 40 years. And I've been rather fortunate to work with Tommie. I think the early survey started in 79, and Tommie's been there all the way. And so I've been fortunate to hear from him, to look at old distribution maps. We got a good idea of the baseline, what was, and how it's changed over the years, and he's got a wealth of knowledge. And I think we hope to declare him a national monument very soon, before he goes in retirement. Say again? It takes a while to load. Well, I'm in a hurry. I've got a lot of things to do. It's showing in the one side already, but okay. Oh, there we go. Finally. This is really just the background. You've heard most of it. South Africa is considered one of the centers of cycad diversity, hosting more than half of the known encephalatus species in Africa, namely 38 species. 76% of the species occurring in South Africa is considered to be endemics. In other words, it's found nowhere else but in South Africa. And then that stat says that South Africa is a really dangerous place for cycads, with 78% of all South African species being threatened with extinction, 12 species classified as critically endangered, 5 endangered, and then 10 classified as vulnerable. Right. 3 of the 4 species which are classified as extinct in the wild, in other words gone, and not coming back, in the wild at least, namely Encephalatus brevifoliolatus, which occurred in Limpopo, Encephalatus nubimontanus, and Encephalatus woodii used to occur in South Africa. Alright. 3 more species are considered possibly extinct in the wild. Serenus, Sutus, which occur in Limpopo, and then Inopinus, which also occurred in Limpopo. Now this is just to give you an idea by ways of, this is rather old graph, just to give you an idea of how blessed we are in terms of representatives of Encephalatus compared to the rest of Africa. Now to our local scene in Mpumalanga has got 8 species. 4 are critically endangered. Cupidus, Hinenai. Cupidus occur in the Blyde Rivier, Kenyan area. Hinenai in the Barberton Mountains. Levifolius, it's probably the cycad with the biggest distribution range, with the center of the distribution was around the KwaZulu-Natal village in Mpumalanga. And then Middelburgensis, as the species name suggests, around the Middelburg area in the Olifants River Valley. Right, one is endangered, Lebombiensis, once again refers to the geographical side, and one is near threatened, Lanatus, occurs in the same distribution range as Middelburgensis in the Olifant. 2 vulnerable, Humulus and Porcidentatus. Right. This is basically a threat assessment that I've adapted from somewhere else, just to give you an idea of what the major threats are in terms of cycads. There's a little legend at the bottom, 0 being the least, and then 5 being the highest. If you look at, for instance, Levifolius, Cupidus, Hinenai, Middelburgensis, all critically endangered. Impact of collector activity, including impact of herbalists, it's rather high. rather red. Humulus and Porcidentatus less so. Lanatus and Lebomboensis over the last few years has actually moved up a little bit in terms of collector activity. Inability of population to regenerate itself through sexual reproductive means. Now, I've gone through most of the old reports of the old Transvaal, and it seems like everywhere they mentioned that most of the populations, it's inherent to the population that they simply just don't reproduce sexually, at least the way we would want them to be, on top of the fact that they're slow growing. And so for most of those, a problem with reproduction, Hien and I even more so, Middelburgensis fairly, and then the others in the other scale, not so much. Impact of habitat degradation from various forms, unfortunately it's right across, and it's basically down to, unfortunately, pardon me, plantations, pine plantations and eucalyptus forestry has opened up a whole new avenue with roads being created around populations, habitat being destroyed itself, and then communities flocking after job opportunities, so they move closer to where these plantations are going up. And so where before was fairly rural, you've now got settlements around it, you've got roads which makes it easily accessible, and you had large tracts of land being destroyed by forestry operations. Impact of natural pathogens, we haven't seen much for most of it, which is fairly low, except for levifolius, where it's been documented that a specific fungus called the Fusarium fungus plays a role with the cones, which destroys female cones specifically. Right, then we've heard about the BMPs. You can see Michelle smiling, that's a area of expertise. I think she enjoys it. And the aim is to ensure the long-term survival of in nature of cycads. I'm not going to go through all of that. You've heard a fair amount. To incentivize, oh, I think I've gone a bit too fast for myself there. Incentivize in situ protection of wild populations, in other words, for the landowner at least, make it worthwhile. Now, unfortunately, we haven't progressed to that level. I think there was only one. Latifrance was the original BMP, where they had a working model there, where there was a bit of incentives for the landowner to look after, to propagate it, and then split it between so much goes to conservation, so much for the landowner. Unfortunately, that one, I believe, is also not working too well. So that's probably a model that's going to be revisited. To improve provincial capacity for implementation of protection measures for wild plants. Now that one is a topic for a whole another day. Unfortunately, the provinces are really struggling, and we'll get to some of those challenges. To mark priority wild cycads with super unique microchips. Now we get the question often that people confuse microchips with being a tracking device. Unfortunately, it's not a tracking device. It's rather reactive. In other words, once the microchip's in the plant is stolen. It only means something once it's recovered. Unfortunately, it's not proactive. It doesn't prevent people. It doesn't act as an early warning system to say that people are tampering with it. Unfortunately, that technology is fairly big still. It hasn't been adapted to fit into a cycad stem to tell you exactly where it's going and when it was removed and that sort of thing. But it acts as a deterrent. I think Tommie wrote a little article when they first started with it in 1997-98 on levifolius, and it was one of the pilot projects, and they've had a couple of successful prosecutions based on stems that was recovered, and you could then prove that the microchip came from a specific location and it's issued with a specific GPS coordinate. So once the stem is found back and it's scanned, with a scanner, you can then prove that it comes from a specific point, but unfortunately it's all reactive. Prioritize research into pollinators. That's also, I won't bore you with that. For now, let me just catch up with time a little bit. DNA barcoding, Ashley said a bit about that, so that's in progress. Okay, species recovery includes the manipulation, enhancing or restoration of species populations. And for the purpose of this report, also refers to restoration and reintroduction. Now, that's the bulk of work that we've done. It refers to manipulation, enhancing. Most of the work that Tommie and I have done has been around enhancing, taking seeds and planting it around where existing populations occur. And so there's also reintroductions into places where it occurred previously, but it was wiped out, with a proviso that it's safe to reintroduce it back into the same localities. Okay, let's not discuss better things to get to. Come on. To develop guidelines for law enforcement officials for the care of confiscated and damaged cycads. Now, that's a potential source of, they talk about breeding colonies. Now the concept that we're using is you can either use existing cycad populations where you've got both male and female plants, and you hand pollinate, you use the existing natural populations as a breeding colony. In other words, you do hand pollination, which then increases the amount of fertile seed, or in cases sometimes with populations that's been wiped out, where we use recovered plants or plants that's been confiscated, which you can then use, especially if they know where it comes from. You can then use as planted in an orchard and use it as a breeding colony. And we've done something similar for levifolius, which have almost been decimated in its original distribution. I was lucky by the time that I arrived, somebody had the foresight and they had planted the plants in sort of an orchard already, and most of the reintroduction work in terms of seed comes from that specific population. Okay, then a rather important one: establish, maintain and secure ex situ gene bank collections for critical and endangered encephalatus species. Now that's something that Sandy's already started, and so we hope to support them in that, with the idea that if everything's gone, you've got a place where they know exactly which locality the plants come from. They have produced seed. Unfortunately, it does have an expiry date, so you can't bank it for that long. But at least then you've got known locality plants in secure places, and I think that's a very important one that hopefully most of the provinces will buy into. Even your confiscated plants, if you know where it comes from, we've done that in the past, donated to Sandy, which then goes into the gene bank. So that's a critical one. Challenges: provinces mostly responsible for funding and implementation. Now that's a very challenging one. If I take, for instance, now with cycad conservation, probably top of the list is security. And in our province specifically, Tommie and I spoke, roughly 50% of all field ranger posts are vacant in our province. And I don't think it's going to be filled in my lifetime. So that's a major challenge. If I can just talk about a couple of localities where Hien and I occurred, they had a ranger picket right next to the population. As soon as the ranger picket went missing, the plants went missing. And so security, and then the province's ability to fund is a serious issue here. Yeah. And so that, I would say, the only drawback to the BMP is that the provinces are responsible for funding and implementation. All right, just a couple of things on Middelburg Gens's really beautiful stems. Now, we started with a population census. Like I said, the early work was done in rather late 70s. Started with a population census in 2010 again, where we compile a dossier, a field dossier for every individual plant, gave it a number according to the farm name, made a drawing, GPS coordinates, inserted a microchip. I'll explain the whole rationale behind it. Study population dynamics, in other words, what's the sex ratio? We do know that cycads are dioecious, in other which you need male pollen in order to pollinate female seeds for sexual reproduction. If you don't have males or you don't have females, no reproduction takes place. Okay, so we look at the structure, which for most of the cycads are adult dominated. Somehow, you don't see in most populations, you don't see either seedlings. You sometimes do seedlings and they disappear after a while. We suspect that fire might play a role. And then very, very low natural pollination takes place. Yeah, and we've already addressed it, like I said, is you do artificial hand pollination. And then the landowner relationship is probably very critical, like Moritz alluded to it. That's your first line of defense. It's critically important to cultivate good relationships with the landowners, and so they become your watchdogs. If they know their cycads and the importance of it, nobody will come close to it without them knowing it. And there was a case in the Middelburg area recently with Lanatus, where one of the landowners actually went and he dug out almost 170 individuals, adult plants. And he was spotted by his neighbor who took pictures and informed law enforcement, and he was caught red-handed with more than almost 180 plants. So the importance of good relationship with the landowners is really critical. And Moritz, I understand some of your frustrations with it. Living in South Africa, I would often call a farmer up and have a conversation, agree on certain things. I introduce myself. Having an Afrikaans name really helps. Willem van Staden, and I do speak Afrikaans, and they're very nice until I show up on the farm, and then you can some of them and some of them say some really politically incorrect stuff, and until I show up and say, "Are you Willem?" I say, "Yes, I'm Willem." No, I must actually say that we've only had great reception from farmers everywhere we went. Like I said, Middelburgenses occur about the upper drainage areas. Bit of background. All right. Population numbers estimated about 350 in the wild, over a couple of two main subpopulations, and then one that's really fragmented, where there's been a lot of theft. Some of it where Moritz was available. 2 minutes, okay, I've got to hurry through it. Okay. This is just to show you how things change over a period. That's the same plant. That was in 2006 when the picture was taken. In 2010 when we started, you could see that stem going over at about 45 degrees. It's now gone completely over. And then what you notice there is that there's another stem on that side and another stem behind that one. So actually it consisted of 4 stems. But when we arrived in 2010, there was only 2 stems. Now if you look at the picture, you don't always notice that. But because the previous guys used a system, of drawings, we were able, because with a picture sometimes you can't cover all the angles, and they used drawings to show stem number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And through the drawings we discovered, there are actually 2 more stems that's gone missing. And ever since we've adapted this, for every individual plant, we do a drawing, the number of stems, and then you get an idea. So every plant has got a drawing like that, as far as possible as we can go. Alright, I've got to hurry through this. 25% decrease in the number of plants between 2010 and 83, 12 plants. 10% decrease in the number of stems. Sex ratio, for every 1 female, there's more or less two males, which is unnatural. It should be ideally 1 to 1. And no sexual reproduction. In other words, no pollination, no seedlings, no nothing. Right. What we've done, like I said earlier, we use seeds. There's been a history of translocations in the Transvaal from a couple of species. Most of them have been unsuccessful. Right. We've done artificial pollination. Had a look at the habitat requirements for seedlings to survive. Most of your adult plants grow between big rocks for fire protection. And then we've resorted to planting seed. They have the least risk of introducing pathogens, least financial impacts, and it's less labor intensive. One person can take 300 seeds, throw it in a bag, go up the mountain. But when it comes to stems, adult stems, it's just impossible with the financial restrictions that we have. You need helicopters and things to to fly it up and down the mountain, which is just impossible for us. And so we've resorted to planting seed. That's just an idea of artificial pollination. The little rubber snake to prevent the baboons from breaking off the cones because they're only open for about a week, where you can get the pollen, the scales open up and you blow the pollen into that, either wet or dry. And so the baboons break it off before it's open or before it's pollinated. So we use rubber snakes to prevent the baboons from getting to the cones beforehand. I'll really rush it. That's an idea of what microhabitat looks like. There's a seedling right in between there. We basically take a seed, shove it in there, and after a while it grows. Those seeds already survived at least a 5-year drought and a severe burn. You can see it's scorched, but it survived the fire, and it's now, I think it's about 7 years old now, those seedlings. All right. We planted 71 seeds in 2010, 22 germinated, 19 survived after the fire. We've got a target in the BMP of 500 seeds over 5 years. We've already exceeded that with 750. Okay. That's some of the stuff we see. That was the original plant. 5 meter stem removed, and we had to pick it up. Cupidus, it's not the tired guy on the outside, it's the plant actually. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, it's really shocking. At one locality they had 350 in 1985. In 2012 it was 89 individuals. In the other locality they had 750 in 85. We found 3 so far. BMP target of 500 seeds over 5 years. The Botanical Gardens has indicated that they've got the seeds available. That's Levifolius, about the KwaZulu-Natal area. Was almost 1,800 plants in 97. There's 9 plants at the original locality at the moment left of it. 15 plants in other areas. BMP target of 2,000 seeds. We've exceeded 2,000 seeds already. And then there's a Maripskop locality that we pollinated on behalf of Limpopo because it forced. That's just a graph to give you an idea of Levifolius. It started around there. Those are all of the other cycads, how they've gone down. Now that's how Levifolius has gone down in a couple of years. It's quite a steep dive. I'm being evicted. Hold on. Come on. Those are some of the seedling projects. If you have a look there, that's actually the seedling close to the adult plant, and there's a close-up shot of it. That's augmenting it, enhancing the original populations. Yin and I, the photos like that because I haven't seen one in the wild in 9 years. Very real chance of going extinct in the wild. There was 360 plants in 96. One reserve was created for that one specifically. 146 in 96, 0 in 2013. In private collections in Nelspruit, they've had 1 cone in 25 years. They seem to be very habitat specific and climate specific. We've taken 12 plants that we found in the nursery. We've replanted them in the field. We've lost 1 so far. But as for the rest of them, they've produced new leaves. And so there's a glimmer of hope for this species there. Okay, let me just carry on. Lebomboensis, medicinal having the biggest threat. Exotics like Morris said, Chromalina and Lantana. We've investigated the possibility of finding a new locality to introduce it. Now this one is not in immediate danger. For once we're trying to be proactive here and find a new locality. We've applied for 3 EPWP teams to clean the exotics. We've planted more than 2,000 seeds of the Peter T form, which is found in Natal, which overlap with Mpumalanga. I'm almost done. Come on.
You can have time because of the delay.
Yeah. All right. That's what the seedlings looks like between the rocks. That's actually medicinal having taking place at the original locality. It's quite severe. We're hoping to put out a monitoring plot, a long-term monitoring plot soon, to just get an idea to quantify, does it continue in the same plants, does it spread to new plants? Yeah, and that's some of the climate data monitoring or collection that we've done. And that is my story. Thank you for your patience.